Thank you for coming this evening. We're looking forward to sharing the next couple hours together, focusing on a topic that, from my perspective, is a very important topic for us to understand as believers. That topic is depression. 1 out of 4 people coming into my office has a depression level over 80%. And I've often asked myself the question, how do we actually help people resolve their depression? In this first session, I would like to talk about depression and take you to the Bible to find out what the Bible says about depression. In the second session, I would like to share with you a proposition that I think is very important. We could eradicate 90% of depression in the church if we followed 5 steps that I'm going to define at the end of this evening. The reason people are depressed is because of issues that have happened in their life that create emotional pain. And that depression often comes from things that have happened in their childhood that emotionally damage them. What I've sought to do through the years is to ask the question, why are people depressed? Why are they struggling with depression? And most people that go to counselors with depression, the counselor focuses intellectually on trying to convince them to stop having these negative thoughts and to try and fight the negative thoughts off with the truth. The problem with that is like putting a Band-Aid over cancer. The cancer will never go away because you're trying to stop thoughts that are coming from emotional pain inside. What I like to do is identify what thoughts are people thinking, what's happening in their heart. Because if a person's depressed, there's something that went wrong, usually in their childhood or in their adult life, that's actually causing the depression. If a person was never loved, their negative thoughts are going to go down the path of, nobody cares about me, nobody wants me, nobody loves me. Now, when you take their negative thoughts, and if you have your workbook, I would like for you to turn to page 116 in your blue workbook called Biblical Concepts Counseling Workbook. On page 116, you have a list of negative thoughts. These actually came from a lady who was depressed at 99%. These were all of her negative thoughts, and I asked her if I could put them in my book, and she agreed. This particular lady that listed those negative thoughts on that sheet of paper had a mother who constantly said, I wish you were never born. I never really wanted you. And emotionally, that lady had never been loved by her mother, causing her to have a depression level at 99%. Sometimes people's depression comes because their parents were perfectionists and they could never meet the expectations of their parents. Sometimes people are depressed because their parents were angry and critical with them and emotionally damaged them. What we want to do this evening is identify what causes a person to become depressed and how can we reverse that. The most fun I ever have in counseling is to see if I can take a 99% depressed person and in 4 hours knock that depression away where they can't find their depression. That's the most fun thing I do in counseling. Because what I have to do is I have to define the cause of that depression, start caring about that person's heart, and what happens is all of a sudden they start smiling and they lose their depression. And pretty soon they're looking for their depression. They should be able to find it under my desk somewhere and it's gone. Why? Only because someone understood their pain and cared about it and helped them resolve it. Now, I carry depression from age 15 to 35. And I tried to fight it off. I tried to work hard to cover my depression. I tried all kinds of things. I tried to quote Scripture constantly, and for 10 years I quoted Scripture to try and fight my negative thoughts, but that didn't work either. What I found is that if one person would have taken 3 hours of time to say, John, can I identify what you're struggling with inside and identify where your pain is and lead you in a prayer to disconnect that pain, I would have lost my depression. But in the 66 years I've lived, not one person has ever sat down with me and says, John, can I understand what's going on inside your heart? Can I understand how you were damaged? Because there's a specific emotional way I was damaged as a child that emotionally created my depression. And what I began to realize in the last 20 years as I started counseling other people, there's a certain pattern that leads to depression in a person's life. And we have to identify what that is, and it takes sometimes 4, 6, 8 hours of time to understand where that depression is coming from and help that individual to resolve that issue inside through prayer and understanding and caring, and that person will lose their depression. In Mennonite circles, depression is higher. And there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, Mennonites don't praise. I was raised in a Mennonite home, and my mother said, you never praise your children, because if you praise your children, they're going to get prideful. And so in our culture, and I say in our culture, generally speaking, parents don't praise their children. But in Mennonite circles, there's high expectations. Most Mennonites are very self-disciplined. So there's a lot of pressure to perform with children, and they're expected to do everything perfect, but they're never praised or appreciated for what they do. That's one cause within this culture that causes a greater problem with depression. There's a second problem, and that is also a cultural problem. In Mennonite circles, generally speaking, we break a child's spirit before 3 by looking at them with displeasure, and that creates a rejection score inside where they feel rejected just because dad or mom looks with displeasure on their children, and we don't connect with our children. We control them with our eyes. And that's another culture. Now, when I talk about culture, I'm not saying every Mennonite doesn't praise, and I'm not saying that every Mennonite emotionally damages their children, but those are the patterns within this culture that we have to realize are there, and often those are the things that actually lead to depression. I'd like to make a statement, and that's this. No person can be depressed if they're connected emotionally to. I'm going to repeat that. You can't be depressed if someone is connecting to care about your heart and you're feeling that connection. Often in a marriage relationship, I have a wife who's depressed, a husband who's detached, and the husband who's detached is not connecting with his wife, and she doesn't feel loved, and that leads her to experience depression because no one's caring about her, no one understands her, no one's emotionally connecting to care about her. In my office, whenever I see a depression score on my test, I see if I can get the spouse to begin caring about the emotional need of the heart of that other person. When you do that, that other person loses their depression. Now, we want to ask the question today, what causes people to be depressed? And I would like to take you to the Old Testament, to 1 Kings chapter 19. And I would like to talk about a man in the Bible who was a prophet, probably the greatest prophet in the Old Testament, Elijah. Not one thing is said negative about Elijah. Other prophets, other men, the Bible shares negative things about them, their sins, issues of fault comings. Nothing negative is said about Elijah in the Bible, apart from the fact that he was depressed after his Mount Carmel experience. It's interesting, Elijah struggled emotionally with depression. And I want to identify the causes of why Elijah was depressed, because if we're to help another person that's depressed, we have to understand what's happening inside their heart and understand the emotional pain inside their heart. The first thing I'd like to ask is, what causes a person to be depressed? And I'm going to be making references to 1 Kings chapter 19. You're welcome to look at that chapter if you like, because I'm going to refer to it in this session off and on. The first cause of why people get depressed is if a person doesn't sleep properly, often they get depressed. Elijah hadn't slept for a period of time because he was running from Jezebel, who sought to take his life. And because of his lack of rest, that was one of the reasons why he was depressed. The second one was his lack of a proper diet. He wasn't eating properly. Universities and colleges have found that during test week, the amount of depression among students increases because typically students don't eat when they're taking tests, and their depression levels go up. If people don't have a proper diet and eating properly, often that can be a reason why they're depressed. The third reason people get depressed is because of anger that they have inside. Elijah was angry because the children of Israel didn't bow the knee to God after Mount Carmel experience. And as a result of his anger, he was depressed. Minirth Meier make this statement: 100% of everyone hospitalized for depression, the cause is unresolved anger. What they mean is clinically depressed people that have to be hospitalized for depression, they haven't been able to deal with their anger, and they're holding anger inside, and that's one of the causes of why Elijah was depressed. By the way, Cain, Moses, and Elijah, all three of these men experienced depression, and all three, the cause was unresolved anger. The fourth cause of why people get angry is excessive stress. It's interesting, in Matthew 26, verses 37 and 38, it says that the Lord Jesus Christ was sorely depressed. That was just before he went to the cross. Now, Jesus never sinned, which tells me that depression does not necessarily come from sin. It can come from extreme stress. And when Jesus was facing the cross to pay the penalty for our sins, the Bible says he was depressed. Moses was depressed because he wasn't delegating responsibility to other people, and he was trying to judge 2.5 million Israelites in the wilderness, and the stress of that pressure caused him to be depressed. That's in Numbers chapter 11, verse 14. Elijah was depressed because of the stress of being a prophet, and people weren't turning to God, and as a result of that stress and that pressure, he became depressed. The fifth reason why people get depressed is they begin feeling sorry for themselves because of circumstances that have occurred in their life. Moses and David and Jonah all felt sorry for themselves. Jonah felt sorry for himself because Nineveh repented. Elijah was depressed because the Israelites wouldn't repent, just the opposite of Jonah. And it's interesting, whenever you deal with a person who's depressed, often you find an individual who's feeling sorry for themselves, and they're totally focused on themselves as a result of the pain that they're carrying. When you take a person like that and you go and look for their pain, and they're honest with you and they open up their pain, usually there's 3 to 4. Recently I had a person with 12 issues of pain that actually triggered their depression. And when I helped them understand those issues and resolve those issues, what happened is they lost their depression. Now, if you'll take your little sheet that you received this evening as you came in, you'll notice that a depressed person is a person who has experienced pain and they feel rejected. Then they get angry, and that anger is usually turned in, leading to depression. That depression leads to anxiety. That anxiety leads to socially pulling away, and a person will go to their bedroom and not come out for 3 days. Or a person will not want to go to church or not want to be around their family. The next is they stop talking and they just close everything in. They pull their heart away, and often what happens is they can't make decisions and they lose their identity. This is a pattern of depression. Now what we have to do, if we're going to help them resolve it, is we have to ask the question, what is causing that depression that actually causes them to go into that cycle? I'll never forget a man by the name of Joe came in to my office. He was working for Hewlett-Packard in Colorado Springs, and his face was beet red. He was depressed. His job was to put addresses on boxes and ship electronics all over the United States for Hewlett-Packard. He had a boss that cussed at him every time he put tape crooked on the box. And emotionally, Joe just went into deep depression. Finally, the person in charge asked him to take a 3-month sabbatical. He went to his pastor and said to his pastor, I'm depressed, what do I do? They laid me off of work for 3 months, and then they're going to reevaluate to see if they can hire me back. The pastor sent him to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, you have a chemical imbalance in your brain. What you need to do is take these pills, and he prescribed a bunch of pills. Joe knew that I was a pastor across town and that I did counseling, so Joe came to see me. And he sat in my office and he said, I have a chemical imbalance, and the doctor says I have this missing in my brain and this missing in my brain, and I've got to take these pills for the rest of my life. Now, doctors have 5 minutes to prescribe something to a depressed person. They don't take 6 hours of time or 8 hours of time to understand what's happening emotionally inside of a person. I took the list of causes of why people get depressed, and I began to realize in talking with Joe, he had no purpose for living. At work, he was cussed out for putting tape on crooked. His wife didn't need him. His children didn't want him around. Nobody valued him. And it was at a time in my own ministry where I was putting charts together and I was scribbling them on a piece of paper, and I had about 30 charts like this on pieces of paper, and I would have to write them out, and computers were just coming in, and Joe had just bought Hewlett-Packard's latest computer and latest color printer. Joe wanted to pay me for the 2 hours he spent in my office, and I said, I don't charge for counseling, it's free. And he kept insisting, and I said, well, there is something you can do. You're not working right now. Would it be possible if you could take these charts and make them look pretty so I'm not embarrassed? And I just scribbled on a piece of paper charts like this, and I had 20 or 30 of them, and I handed them to him. 2 days later, his wife calls me and says, what did you do to my husband? He's not depressed anymore. I gave him a reason to live. I needed him. Nobody else needed him. Hewlett-Packard didn't need him. They cussed at him. His wife didn't need him. She was making twice as much money at Hewlett-Packard as he was, and she was connected to the children who had been grown and the grandchildren, but he had no connection with anybody, and he felt total rejection inside. The interesting thing is, he came back into my office and I said, Joe, you don't have a chemical imbalance. You have a problem with being needed by another person. When I needed you to help me with my charts, and you made these red, blue, green charts, and they were all beautiful. Now I only have black charts, but his were all colored charts with the first colored printer that Hewlett-Packard produced. And they were beautiful charts, and I thanked him for them, and that was the beginning of the charts. Now I've got 150 of them in manuals like this. They all started with Joe because he was the first one who put them together. I said, Joe, would you do something for me? If you do what I say, you're going to lose your depression. I said, you go to Mesa Hills Bible Church. Would you go to your pastor and say, if you ever need a banner, you ever need a chart, give me 24 hours and I'll have it done for you? I've been to Mesa Hills Bible Church on a number of occasions, and here's this great big mission banner going clear across the front of the church. I know who made it because it doesn't say Joe on it, but I know Joe did it. Joe lost his depression because somebody valued him, because no one ever respected him or valued him as a person. His parents didn't. His wife didn't. Nobody in the church did. I decided as a pastor from another church just to care about Joe, and he lost his depression. Now I'm going to say this, solving depression problems is a lot easier than we think. Not that depression isn't a difficult thing to correct, but the solution to depression is rather simple, like I just described in Joe's life. I had to spend a couple hours to understand what was happening with Joe, where was his pain tied to, and I boiled it down to Joe had never been valued by anyone. No one ever felt he was significant. He had never done anything where people appreciated what he did. And when I appreciated what he did and I thanked him, his face just lit up, and I messed up his depression just by thanking him for his chart that he made for me. That was because that's where his depression was connected to. Now, everybody's depression is connected differently, so just because Joe's was not valued, another person's depression might be because nobody ever cared for them, nobody ever understood them, nobody ever focused to love them. Going back to our chart, the sixth reason why people get depressed is disobedience to God's revealed will. Not all depression is caused by sin. Some depression is caused by sin. It's interesting, Cain killed his brother Abel, and the Bible says he became depressed, and God says, if you wouldn't have sinned, you wouldn't be depressed. In Cain's example, Cain's depression came from guilt for killing his brother. If a wife or a guy has an abortion, often they experience severe depression because they took the life of a child. Often that depression comes 15 years after the abortion, because what happens is, as a teenager, age 16, they have an abortion. They don't realize what taking the life of a child is about. Then later on they get married, they have a child, and they hold a child, and they realize that they actually took the life of a child that they could have easily connected to, and then they feel guilty for doing that, and that leads to depression. So disobedience to God's revealed will, sin, can be one of the causes, but it's not the only reason why people get depressed. The seventh reason people get depressed is personal expectations of God or of others or of God. Jonah got upset because God allowed the Ninevites to repent, and he didn't want them to repent because the Ninevites had damaged Israel in wars prior to that. Elijah wanted people to turn to God, and when they refused to turn to God, he got depressed. When I was a pastor, if I expected 30 people to show up on Sunday night and only 10 people showed up, I'd get depressed because I had higher expectations of the people than they achieved. That can lead to depression. The eighth reason why people get depressed is fear. Elijah feared what might happen with Jezebel killing him, and often people, because of realistic fear inside, get depressed. The final cause is loneliness. If I were to identify the greatest cause for depression, it's lack of emotional connection. because we get so busy, we don't connect in relationship. When a husband is emotionally detached from his wife and she feels all alone and no one is ever emotionally connected to care about her, she's going to get depressed. A husband may be busy at work, but if nobody connects with him, work never fulfills one's emotional need for love. And when I ask the question of people, have you ever felt loved in your life? It's amazing how many people have never felt loved by one person. No one has ever connected with them to care about their heart. And one of the greatest causes for why depression occurs is people have never experienced feeling somebody caring about their heart and understanding that. Let's look at some of the symptoms of Elijah's depression. And I'm just going to list these, and I'm not going to take a lot of time to describe them. But these are in order in 1 Kings chapter 19. The first response Elijah had was his fear of Jezebel. A person that's depressed often has unrealistic fears that they feel inside. And sometimes those fears don't make any sense to an objective person on the outside, but they need to be understood. The second is he ran away from pressure. In verse 3, a depressed person often will run away from responsibilities because it seems overwhelming. A depressed mother can't stand it when the child is crying. A depressed mother can't stand it when there's noise in the room. A depressed father can't stand it when there's tension in the room. That creates an intense reaction. The third thing is that a person who's depressed, like Elijah, felt sorry for himself. The fourth is he had suicidal thoughts. And often a depressed person could have suicidal thoughts, wanting to take their own life like Elijah had. The fifth is Elijah questions God's providence in the circumstances of his life. Number 6, he exaggerates the problem when he says not one person is worshiping God, and God says, I have 7,000 Israelites that haven't bowed the knee to Baal. The seventh is Elijah withdrew and he went away by himself. And often I hear of men who all of a sudden are gone for 4 days. Nobody knows where they're at. And they sit in a motel room for 4 days all by themselves, not interacting with anybody. Or you have a wife who goes to the bedroom for 3 days and doesn't come out. That's typical of a depressed person, where they withdraw. Number 8, they're oversensitive. I mentioned earlier, everything bothers them. And they have a loss of self-esteem, a loss of perspective, and often they become hopeless. And they have unresolved anger inside. What are the consequences if depression isn't resolved? And again, I'm going to go to the scriptures to define individuals in the Bible who were depressed and what happened to them. Elijah desired to be all by himself. We mentioned that already. He had a sense of being rejected by others. He had a feeling of worthlessness, of no value. He was angry at himself and God. He stopped fulfilling responsibilities. Whenever a person is depressed, all of a sudden the dishes don't get washed, the clothes don't get washed, the house doesn't get cleaned, the garage doesn't get cleaned by the husband. Depression causes a person to lose perspective, and all of a sudden you can't accomplish normal things that are needed to be accomplished. They desire to escape the pressure rather than dealing with it, and that's what Elijah did when he went to the cave to hide. Number 7, there's a sense of being alienated from God, and a person many times says, God doesn't care, nobody cares about me. Number 8, there's a loss of joy. Moses, Elijah, Cain, and David all lost their joy when they were depressed. Number 9, complaining because of circumstances being overwhelming. Moses, when he was depressed, complained. Elijah complained. David complained. All of these individuals complained, and when you and I are depressed, we complain when circumstances seem overwhelming. The last is 3 men in the Bible desired that God would end their life. Moses, Elijah, and Jonah all wanted to end their life because they had no more reason to live. When I sit in my office, I have 2 ways of identifying if a person is depressed. One is a test, and one is to identify and just ask them what's happening in their life. And often a person will say to me, I just don't want to go on living anymore. It's too painful. I can't keep doing this anymore, and the problem is severe depression that they're experiencing inside. Because I went through 20 years of depression, I know what that feeling feels like, and it's not a fun feeling. And I began to start caring about people who are struggling with depression, understanding the pain and understanding what is happening inside their life. And I began to realize that God began in Scripture to identify and resolve people's depression. And it's interesting, when Elijah was depressed, in 1 Kings chapter 19, the first thing God did was he brought a raven to bring a McDonald's hamburger to him at the cave. I don't know what God had the raven bring, but he brought 2 meals and he fed them. Often depressed people stop eating because they're so hurt inside and struggling. The second thing is God came in a still small voice, and he cared about Elijah. Now, God could have come and says, Elijah, what are you doing in the cave? I got work for you to do. Why aren't you doing your work? He never said that. If you use a directive method of counseling with a depressed person, you actually are going to create more depression. God didn't do that with Elijah. He never criticized. He never condemned. He never attacked. He never said, Elijah, you got it all messed up. When are you going to get your act together? But God cared about the pain of this prophet. And when I sit with a depressed person and I begin understanding what's happening inside of a person, every depressed person has ever sat in front of me, and by the way, there's been hundreds, I sit down and say, the fact that you're depressed tells me, first of all, no one is connecting to care about your heart at this point in your life. And maybe no one has ever cared for you. And immediately when I say that, people start crying in my office because they all of a sudden realize my dad didn't connect, my mom didn't connect, my husband's not connecting, no wonder I'm struggling with depression. And then I say to them, no one is ever depressed if they're feeling loved and cared for. You can't be depressed if you feel valued, significant, cared for by one person. But the problem is the majority of marriages, and I'm talking about a marriage relationship now, husbands don't understand their wives' depression, don't understand the emotional need of their wives, and as a result of that, they never connect to care. In fact, I don't encourage anybody to get married if a man doesn't know his wife's emotional need and has figured out 6 months before the wedding how to meet that and consistently meets that emotional need. Secondly, I don't think any man should get married until he understands his wife's emotional pain and he's willing to care about that. And I think every wife ought to be able to emotionally, before she gets married, understand her husband's emotional need and care and understand his pain and care about his pain. If we did that, we wouldn't have depression in our marriages. But the problem is people don't understand their emotional needs, and as a result, those needs are not met. The first thing God does with Elijah's depression is he gives him a meal, 2 meals. The second is he refreshes his spirit. He encourages him. And the last thing a depressed person needs is to be criticized. What they need is encouragement, to be cared for. They need someone to sit down with them and identify the cause of that depression and understand why they're depressed and care about that. A conservative Mennonite gal came for counseling in a conference like this a number of years ago. She was depressed at 99%, felt rejection at 99%, was angry at 99%, had socially pulled away, was active social at 1%, expressive at 1%, emotionally sympathetic at 1%. All of her scores were at the worst point they could be. I asked her for her story, and she said, I was raised in an Amish home. And when I was 6 years of age, my parents left the Amish church. And when they left the Amish church, we were shunned and shamed, which means nobody talked to us. My parents were both depressed after we left because no one talked to them. All my girlfriends at age 6 were not allowed to talk to me. And she said, I didn't know what to do. I said, were you a depressed girl before 6? She says, no. She says, my grandfather lived on this side of the home, and my parents lived on this side of the home, and there was a wall between, and my grandfather came out of his door, and for the first 6 years would come into our home, pick me up, take me in his horse and buggy to town, and he would talk with me nonstop. And I was his favorite grandchild. And I smiled and I laughed and I talked nonstop with my grandfather. Until I was 6, my grandfather was not allowed to talk to me because then he would be excommunicated the next Sunday. So he couldn't talk to me. But we would go in the horse and buggy to town. He would still take me to town, but he would stop and talk to a neighbor for an hour across buggies on a street going to town. But he never talked to me again. He wasn't allowed to. So I put at the top here, shunned and shamed by Grandpa, the only person that ever really connected with her. Her parents emotionally pulled away because they were both depressed because of the shunning and shaming they experienced. All of her friends deserted her. Everyone at church never talked to her after that. And emotionally, she locked down. Secondly, because of her depression, she began to not talk to anybody, and after age 6, she never had any friends. Nobody cared for her. Then she married an emotionally detached husband who was sympathetic at 1%, who never focused on her, never cared for her, and actually stepped on that pain. 90% of the time, we marry our worst pain or worst parent in our past. And because she had been shunned and shamed, she was used to no one talking with her. So she marries a husband who can't communicate and never connects with her. So now she has 20 years of no communication. And I look at my test and I say, no wonder we have pain here. I said, would you like for me to help you disconnect that pain? I said, it takes me about 30 minutes to disconnect that. She said, sure. So I led her in a prayer, and the prayer went something like this. Jesus, when I was 6 years of age, my best friend, my grandfather, emotionally stopped talking to me. What does that do to a little girl? Can you draw a picture of my heart damaged by that? She burst into tears. And I saw a little 6-year-old girl crying in front of me. No one had ever cared about that. It's just what happens in that culture. Jesus, how would you heal my heart? Jesus, do you love me even if everyone else turns their back on me? Jesus, do you care about little Amish girls that are shunned and shamed? How would you make my heart okay? We got done with a prayer, and all of a sudden her husband looked at her eyes, and something had changed inside of him because he was starting to cry because he realized her pain. And his eyes connected with hers, and she started giggling like a 6-year-old girl would giggle. I've seen some around the church here. They can't keep from giggling. It just comes out. It's just what happens with little girls. And she started giggling. Now, she wasn't 6 years of age. She was 50 years of age. But that little girl's heart at 6 all of a sudden opened up. And every time she started giggling. By the way, Amish girls jump into their husband's lap faster than anyone else in my office, because once they feel loved and you lead them in a prayer to disconnect their pain, for some reason Amish girls jump in their husband's lap. That's just what happens in my office because they're so lonely for love. They got to get it, and they wrap their arms around their husband and they can't let go. Just what Amish girls do. I'm just telling you their culture, what I see in my office. What happened is that lady lost her pain. And then I showed the husband how to disconnect his emotionally detached heart because he had pain locking that down. And I said, if you care about this 6-year-old girl's heart, she can't be depressed. The test shows me that she was 99% depressed. We defined why she was depressed, helped her understand what caused that, had Jesus heal that in her heart by leading her in a prayer, and she lost her depression. Now that particular girl, if the husband emotionally went back and stayed detached, would go back into depression. But if the husband, every 12 hours for the next 40 years, connected to care about that little girl's heart and cared about her emotional need for love, that girl cannot find her depression. That's how easy solving this problem is. Now, that lady's depression was the worst on the test of any I've seen, and it worked. The only problem is you have to understand what's causing that depression, and everyone's cause is different. And you have to sit down with that person and identify from their heart what did they experience, how were they damaged, and from that perspective, help them resolve it. You say, John, how did you figure this all out? Well, I figured it out by going to the scriptures and asking the question, how did God deal with depression? When God dealt with Elijah, he cared about Elijah's pain. He understood his pain. If you read the Psalms are filled from the beginning to the end of David going to God with his depression, with all of his pain, and God giving David word pictures that healed his heart, that revived his heart and brought him back to trusting God and resting in God's promises. And the whole book of Psalms is filled with that. Why? Because God cared about David's heart. God cared about Elijah's heart. And I'm going to say this, God cares about each person sitting here who's depressed. And I don't think God wants us depressed. But in order to resolve that depression, we have to understand how our hearts have been damaged, what happened to them, and we have to understand that Jesus wants to heal that heart and resolve it. What are the causes of why people get depressed? And often what I do is I lay this chart in front of a client and I say, would you cross off everything that doesn't relate to you on this chart? Then I take everything they don't cross off and I begin to identify what has caused them to experience depression. For example, if you look on that sheet, lack of purpose fulfillment, that was Joe's problem. He had no reason to live. He had no purpose. And when I gave him a purpose as a friend, actually I was counseling him as a pastor, I needed him to help me with my charts. He lost his depression because I identified the cause And I went through and I started checking off. He doesn't have this one, he doesn't have that one, he doesn't have that one. And pretty soon it was between lack of purpose or too high expectations people were putting on him. And when I took the first one and I guessed on it, I guessed right because he lost his depression when I valued and cared about him. So what you have to do is you have to take a list like this, and by the way, these all have scriptural connections to Elijah, David, Moses, Cain, all the individuals in the Bible that were depressed. Now let's look at the 12 causes for depression. One reason why people get depressed is they have bitterness inside their heart. Cain was bitter, Moses was bitter, they were both angry. That led to their depression. Low self-esteem, feeling like no one cares, I have no value, can lead to depression. Feelings of rejection, loneliness can lead to rejection. And as I said earlier, one of the key factors to why people get depressed is because no one ever emotionally connected with them. Lack of purpose and fulfillment, that was Joe's issue. Excessive stress, that was Christ's experience in the Garden of Gethsemane. Self-pity, disobedience to God's revealed will, a sin can lead to depression. Guilt caused by sin, too high expectation of yourself or others placing on you. Fear of what might happen, poor eating habits, and lack of sleep. And so what I encourage people to do is make this list. And if someone is depressed, tell them to cross off all the ones that don't relate to them, then take the ones that are left. If they say, well, I'm angry at God, or I'm angry at my father, or I'm angry at the pastor, whatever, we find out what's caused that, and I help them resolve that bitterness. If they have lack of purpose, I find out what is happening. Is it their job that gives them lack of purpose? With Joe Lazat, I said to him, it's okay that you work for Hewlett-Packard. It's probably one of the most prestigious places in Colorado Springs to work. But I want to be honest with you, getting depressed every day probably isn't the best experience. I said, there's 70 Christian ministries in Colorado Springs. Someone is going to be wanting your help, Joe. He went to work for Focus on the Family, and he lost his depression because somebody valued him in the shipping department of Focus on the Family. I share that because he just needed to be encouraged to say, it's okay, you don't have to stay with this job. Why don't you find something that is fulfilling, something that would meet your emotional needs? The key problem with depression is a person's heart is damaged and their thoughts about themselves change. Our thoughts can be influenced by sin in a sinful world. Our thoughts are influenced by the circumstances that happen in our life. If you had parents that didn't care about you, rejected you, were angry and critical of you, you can't change those circumstances, but those circumstances in life can create the development of depression. Our thoughts are also influenced by other people. If people like us, obviously we're excited, but if people don't like us and they reject us, we have pain inside. Our thoughts are also influenced by generational issues. You can have an uncle or a parent that was depressed and you inherit that tendency. That's also a possibility. Now, what happens when a person is depressed is they begin to focus in on their pain and everything is focused on them. And a depressed person can't love, they can't focus on another person to care about them, with the result that other people don't feel loved, and often those people are drained as a result of what happens through a depressed person. What's the impact of negative thoughts on a marriage and the family? When you have a mother who's depressed, often she is so focused on her pain and doesn't always accomplish everything she could accomplish in her home. The children don't get any emotional connection because the mother is focused on her own pain. Often what happens is a father emotionally pulls away because he doesn't know what to do with her. And as a result, she emotionally tries to connect with one of the children, and she drains the children to meet her emotional need for love. And that's one of the negative consequences of depression. On the other hand, if a husband and wife are emotionally connecting and meeting each other's need, there can't be depression in that relationship. And if they're emotionally caring about each other's hearts, they're going to have the emotional energy. Instead of draining out of the children, they're going to be focused to give to the children and care about their hearts. After the break, I'm going to share with you a story of a lady who was severely depressed. She was just a lady in a church, and she had been severely emotionally damaged by a mother who didn't want her, by all the emotional pain that she experienced. And you're going to listen to her story and you're going to say, how could anybody cope with that kind of pain? A lady in the church, just a friend, befriended her, and over a period of 3 years started caring about her heart. The name of the lady was Marilyn Dameron. She was to be here this week, but she and her husband Gary, who've been at the last 60 seminars, was not well because of a hearing problem, and so they had to cancel out. But Marilyn began to befriend this lady, and she listened, and she cared. And whenever the lady would allow her, she would pray with her and lead her to Jesus, for Jesus to heal all the pain in her heart. The lady's problem was so intense, no one had ever believed her story until she met Marilyn. And Marilyn accepted all the horrible things that she experienced. At the end of 3 years, this lady lost her depression because somebody cared and somebody understood. Can I challenge you tonight? 80% of the Amish Mennonite community that come in for counseling are depressed, over 80%. That's not a good figure. And I'm concerned. And I need your help. Would you assist me? And I don't care if you're a pastor, I don't care if you're just a lay person, I don't care if you just attend a church, you're not a member. I want you to look around the church next Sunday. I want you to watch to see, because probably 6 out of 10 people are going to be depressed next Sunday. Some of you are saying, John, you're exaggerating. I don't think I am. In fact, I think I'm too low. And I want you to identify one person, and all I want you to do is do what Marilyn did. I want you to take that one person and say, could we have coffee together? I just want to care about your heart. I want to care about what you're struggling inside with. You can tell me anything. I don't really care. But whatever you tell me, I'm going to care about. If you say, I was never loved, then I want to be your best friend, and I want to love you, and I want to give you my heart and care about you. If you say I was criticized by an angry mother who rejected me and I could never please her, I'm going to care about that pain, and I'm going to lead you in a prayer to disconnect that pain because I care about you. Do you realize if you did what Marilyn did, you're going to mess up one person's depression? Now, if everybody's sitting here, some of you are depressed and you say, I can't do that until I get free, that's okay. But if every person that's not depressed goes and reaches one person in the next 3 months, or even in the next 3 years, and cares, you know what's going to happen? People are going to say, if you go to this church, everybody's going to care about you and you're going to mess up your problems. You know what's going to happen to your attendance? Everybody's going to want to come to this church. You know why? Because it's a church that cares and understands. And I'm going to say this, we could eradicate 90% of depression if we did that. Minirth Meyer make this statement, 5 to 10% of depression is caused by chemical imbalance. That means you have to go to the doctor, If you have a thyroid problem, it can lead to depression. If you have a change of life problem, that could lead to depression. That's what I call a chemical imbalance. But it's only 5 to 10%. 90 to 95% of depression is caused by emotional or spiritual issues unresolved. That's what I'm talking about. And that 90 to 95% of depression can be eradicated just by one friend caring about another. Now, some of you have a wife who's depressed. Some of you have a husband who's depressed. I'd like to encourage you to start with them then tonight. Look at their eyes and say, what triggers your depression? Are you depressed because nobody ever cared for you? Are you depressed because everybody rejected you? Are you depressed because you were criticized? Someone put high expectations on you and you couldn't meet them? When you start asking those questions, or you take the sheet I just put up on the board a few minutes ago, and you say, what's causing your depression? Will you be honest with me? If you're honest with me, I'm going to start caring about whatever you say. And like John did with Joe, I'm going to find out what causes your depression. I'm going to pray with you, and I'm going to care about that. You could ruin your spouse's depression. Now, I have a sad story to say. If you go to the doctor, he's got 5 minutes to give you medicine, and if you take medicine for over 5 years, you have to stay on that medicine, and it makes you a zombie. That's what depression medicine does. I'm not against medicine for those who mentally are not focused, because sometimes medicine is important, but it's way overprescribed today, and we have a lot of Christians that are walking around like zombies. Because the problem is not they need medication. The problem is no one has ever taken the time to understand their pain and care. And I'm appealing to you as believers to start caring for those depressed people, because they need somebody to understand and care about their pain. In the last 17 years, I've sat with 1,400 couples. That's 2,800 people in my office. 1 out of 4 of them is depressed over 80%. That's a bunch of depression. I have never, to this day, found a depressed person that was only depressed because they had a chemical imbalance. Every person that scores on that depression score, I found emotional pain that was not understood and cared for. And when that person cooperated to let me find their pain, they experienced freedom from that depression. And I'm excited, because there's an answer to depression. I apologize that the medical field is not identifying the real problem. They're just medicating it. But as Christians, let's begin caring for people who are struggling. You cannot be depressed if someone is caring and you're feeling their care for you. It does not work. The only exception is if you have a chemical problem. But emotionally, if someone cares about you and you feel that love, you're going to lose your depression. And I challenge you as believers to be that caring heart to people who are struggling. Thank you very much. I'll turn it back to Pastor Tim.
Humiliated, despised, and betrayed. My home life was very chaotic. It was crazy, and it was torn apart from the very beginning. My mother married my father simply as a means to get out of her parents' home, and she didn't love him. My mother made it clear to my father after marriage that this was a marriage of convenience and that she didn't ever want to have children. As her alcoholic drinking went out of control, my father struggled to maintain some kind of organized home life. And 7 years into their marriage, I was born. The pregnancy was an accident. My mother was really angry about this pregnancy and during the pregnancy. blaming the baby for now being trapped in this god-awful marriage, as she called it. She hated being pregnant. My mother was a strikingly beautiful woman, and she hated what pregnancy was doing to her body. She hated the sickness that she felt, and she told others, who then told me, that she hated the baby's movements inside her. From my earliest memories, I can't remember ever feeling warmth or love from my mother. I don't have a single memory of being hugged or kissed by her. Not one. I can't remember a time when she said that she loved me, or when she said to someone else that she cared about me and perhaps they would convey it to me. That just never happened. I don't remember any gestures or any looks that conveyed in any way that I was important to her or that I was accepted by her. In my earliest years, she just seemed indifferent to me. I remember feeling in preschool that my mother didn't like me and that she wished I wasn't there. Through my child's heart, I felt rejected and despised by both my parents. My mother paid little to no attention to me except to trot me out to show me off to others if I was reflecting well on her at that point. And my father was always gone. He went on business trips continually, or if he were home, he would be preoccupied by his work, or he would disregard me or ignore me because he was busy trying to get his share of my mother's attention. For my mother, more and more of her attention was given to alcohol. One night when I was 7, my father was again away on a very long business trip, and I heard some noises. I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard these noises, and this time I went out and I walked into the front room, and we had a couch that pulled out onto a bed, and I saw my mother there with a man. I stood there frozen for a time, just looking. And then I quietly tiptoed back to my room, and I got into my bed and I pulled the blankets up over my head and stayed there all night long. Never said a thing about that. When at the end of the business trip, when my father came home, though, I worked up the courage to tell him what I'd seen. And he was comforting to me. He thanked me for telling him. And I remember thinking, oh, thank God. Now this is all going to change. I distinctly remember feeling these feelings of intense relief that I had finally told. So this wasn't the first time that this had occurred. It's just the first time I stood there watching it. That I'd finally told, and that I'd said some truth about what our family was really like. But nothing changed. In fact, things became much, much worse. Later, in a comment that my mother made, I realized that my father had told her what I had said to him. And I knew instinctively that she was going to make me pay. The rules in our house were always, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, and perfect the art of pretending. I had broken all those rules. I had dared to tell the truth. I had dared to feel my feelings. I had dared to trust my father. And I had dared to not pretend that everything was all right. I had broken all the rules. From that point on, I felt very much like her target. And now I know that that was true. The only place where I felt accepted growing up and cared for and even somewhat loved was in church. And not so much by the people in church. They didn't know how to connect with me, and I surely didn't know how to connect with them. But by God Himself. The only one that I believed really knew this person named Jesus was my grandmother. Her relationship with God set the stage for my own heart to believe that He was real and that He cared for me. Growing up, from the beginning until the teenage years when I left my family home, I always went to church every week and many times a week, and I always went by myself. By the time I was 12, the dynamics between my mother and me had intensified significantly. No longer was there just her benign neglect and indifference. Now my mother had actually begun to display the fact that she despised me and that she wished to harm me. I had most definitely become her target. She would tell me horrible things about myself. She would call me names. She would tell me of the terrible things that awaited me in the future, because you know, that's just the way you are. You think you're better than me, but you aren't. One of the greatest fears of my life growing up and in virtually all of my adult years was that I was going to become like my mother. As I reached adolescence, she was actively addicted to alcohol, and she used prescription and recreational drugs. She was totally self-absorbed, and she was self-focused. I was starkly aware that she regarded me in all aspects of life as her competition. If I was pretty, she was prettier. If I was smart, she was so much smarter. If I had a boyfriend, she would flirt with him and entice his affections away from me. In school, I was a straight A student, yet she never looked at my schoolwork or any of my grades or any of the awards that I got. I can't remember either of my parents being involved in any way with what I was doing in school. Both of my parents skipped my high school graduation, and they didn't acknowledge my graduation at all. I got no card or no gift, not even a word of congratulations. In my teen years, my mother's intent towards me turned malevolent. She wasn't, by that time, just ignoring me. Now she was calculating ways to show me disrespect and to make me disrespect myself. She would put me in humiliating situations that I felt no way out of. She introduced me to drugs, and she provided the drugs for me. She bought me alcohol, and she would set up drinking parties with my friends or with her friends. She created situations that were calculated to ensure sexual moral impurity, and she insisted that I participate. She used me as a lure to entice men, and she enticed boyfriends my age away from me. She would set me up with older men for her own amusement. She showed her contempt for me by laughing the few times that I came to her to ask her to stop doing this with me. Or she would pretend that she was doing no such thing, that she was simply getting some people together to have a little party, and that if I had any class, I would know how to behave. Our talks always made me feel that I was in the wrong, and they deeply confused me. They were crazy-making to me. I wasn't sure if what I was seeing and what I was experiencing was the truth, or if what she said was the truth. She had a way of twisting the truth in a way that sounded truthful to me. I got really confused. Eventually, I just stopped talking to her or to my father or to basically anyone. At 17, I put myself into a Christian residential drug treatment program. It was a one-year program. And the whole time that I was there, my family didn't visit me that entire year. And my mother sold or gave away all of my possessions. And she took my dog to the pound. And she sold my car. And she moved into my bedroom, and she made it her own. And I never again returned home. My adult years were filled with accomplishment. Since I'd been raised to base my worth on my performance, I was really good at performing. Although on the outside, I became a success, on the inside, I was frightened, and I felt utterly alone. My mother taught me that performance was the key to not being despised, and that poor performance, meaning not doing what she wanted me to do, meant that I would be cast off from her and utterly disregarded. She could do something called splitting. She could split me very easily, and that would be a total cutoff. Being unloved was difficult enough growing up in my house, but being totally ignored was absolutely unbearable to me. The tension between my outward success in my adult life and my inward feelings of deep need and inadequacy played out in a variety of ways. I had bouts of depression virtually throughout my adult life, and I had several long clinical depressions. I became overwhelmed by life, and I could go into these places of really deep hiding, where I would withdraw from everything and everyone, except for work. I was always very functional at work. I clung to the exterior trappings of a successful life, continuing to be functional in my career, and I tried to convince myself that all was okay, but it wasn't. My core problem was that I didn't know love. I didn't know what real love felt like. I had never experienced love of any sort in my family, not from my mother or from my father. And I hadn't been very successful in getting love even in my adult life. I didn't really love others, and I had no idea how to extend some kind of loving concern even towards myself. Despised, rejected, deeply disrespected people cannot take love inside. We cannot. We are far too fearful for that, and we don't believe that we're worth it. We also become very well defended against that. When you've never had love, when love dares to come towards you, it feels like pain. It hurts. It's a very scary thing. If you've never had love and it dares to come close, it's painful. At the point of my most intense pain, I reached out to a woman that I'd known in a church that I had attended years before, and she reached back. She listened. She gave me input if I asked her. She prayed with me and not at me. And I slowly, very slowly began to tell her little bits of my life. She listened. And then I dared to tell her a little bit of my childhood experiences. And she listened. And she cared. And she didn't judge me. And then I began to tell her some of the truth of my childhood experiences, starting with the less shocking and slowly over time moving into the more shocking things. And she listened, and she believed what I was saying, and she validated my experiences. And I began to believe that those soul-killing things that I had seen in my childhood and that I had done in my childhood really had occurred via a person who despised me for no reason that I could see, my own mother. And that made me want to do something about this reality of the truth, to acknowledge it as real, and to try to resolve it. So she and I began to pray together about these things, telling God the truth and hearing Him accept the facts just as I stated them, and then asking Him to come to me and to heal me and to love me and to restore me. We prayed together and we prayed apart. We prayed together and we prayed apart. And I brought God into the reality of my past life and into the reality of my current life. This was not a 3-meeting deal. This was not just one counseling session over a course of 4 days or 5 days. This went on for a couple years. This woman met with me off and on for about 3 years at this time. And I was willing to continue to meet with her because over time she demonstrated to me that she deeply cared about me. And this was key for me. She cared. For me, as a fully grown person, encountering this woman was the first time that I had felt that somebody cared about me, who I really was inside. Another key for me was that she refused to give up on me. Her caring broke down my walls of mistrust and broke through all of the defense mechanisms that I had erected over the years. And during this period of our meetings, she became trained as a Caring for the Heart counselor. And she began to incorporate those prayer methods into our praying together. I never took any tests. I never attended any classes. I have not watched a single video. Never filled out any worksheets. I guess I'm just not typical of some of the Caring for the Heart folks. But what she did is she just started praying with me in this new way. And I began praying for myself in this new way. I grabbed hold of that method of praying because it felt to me totally honest and absolutely real. I've been going to church my entire life. I've been praying my entire life, but this was a type of praying that I had never experienced before. And I loved that it was so very simple. And one of the things that I loved about its simplicity is that no longer, by utilizing this method of Caring for the Heart prayer, could I hide in this intellectual maze that I'd constructed for myself over so many years. I found myself praying directly from my heart and bypassing my head. And the chains in my life began to shake, and then they began to break, and healing started touching all of my points of pain, and new foundations began to build under me, and a core identity began to set up inside of me. And I began to pray in this new way on my own for myself. And the pain of my life started lifting. And for the very first time in my entire life, I began to feel love growing inside of me. And this began a process for me. It was pain confessed, removed, and replaced by love. Pain confessed, removed, and replaced by love. That describes the experience that I began to have over and over. And these were more than just experiences. There was a quality about it. It's hard to put into words. There was a tangible reality of what began to take place inside of me. It wasn't just that wishful thinking, that hopeful thinking, that application of Scripture. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's something real and solid that began to set up inside of me. It's called love. I could feel it, and it was real. And God used this practice of bringing Him into my points of pain to release me from the bondages of my past and to set me free. I'm so grateful for this freedom, and that this freedom had already begun for me those many years before, because not too long ago, my mother died. She was a very wealthy woman, and now there are others. Well, I should say this first. Her last act on earth towards me was to betray me and to disinherit me. And she was a wealthy woman, and so now there are others who are multimillionaires. And I will never forget the words that I read in her will when it was mailed to me. And I read through her will to convince me that this was true, what she'd done. And I read this sentence, and it said, I, her name, have intentionally failed to provide for my daughter my name. And this is legalese. I understood it even when I was reading it. This is legalese to declare in a lawful way that she knows what she's doing and that she intends to do what she's doing. I know that. I've been to law school. But for me, as God shined His light on this heartbreaking, shattering truth. This sentence became a declaration of my mother's culpability in how she had treated me my entire life. It was as if she was declaring, finally, boldly to the world, that she did intentionally fail to provide for me my entire life. God's used this sentence that was intended to harm me for my good. Can you see it? This is how God can work in these situations that just seem like He could never use that. But it's hit my heart that she's finally declared to me the truth of that she did intentionally fail to provide for me, which is in fact my experience. And He's used what she intended for harm, for my good. I see clearly now that for reasons that I will never understand, and that I believe that she herself didn't understand, she intended to harm me. Later, as an adult, I learned that she had a personality disorder. And it's a type of personality disorder that makes a person utterly incapable of feeling empathy at all. I found that there was just something powerful in me by just finally admitting the reality that my mother didn't care about me. Instead of trying to hide, as I'd done for my whole life, from the horror of that. When you dare to tell someone that your mother hates you, it's so horrific that they step back from you. I'd learned long ago not to even express that. But once I began to admit that reality, instead of hiding from the horror of it, once I began to just admit it and take that to the Lord, because admitting it just leaves you in the pain. But taking it to the Lord, He began to remove the sting from that truth. And through a process, He replaced that empty place in me with His love. Yes, He did. I declare that to you. I wish that my story was a story of reconciliation. You know, I've heard all this week, and I've heard before, these beautiful stories of couples where we were like this, or she was like that, or I was like this, but now it's like this. I wish my story was a story of reconciliation. God knows how many times I prayed for that, but it is not. But my story is a story of redemption. While the depth of her despising of me can still shock me, I am free from the harm that act and all of her previous acts have caused for me my whole life. I am free of that harm. I've told God the truth about that pain. He's come into it. He's dealt with it. And He set me free from the things of my past that had for so long continued to bind me up and hold me captive. This has happened to me through His grace and through a woman who befriended me, who cared enough to just keep coming after me, even as I did my best to run away from her. And through Caring for the Heart ministry, which taught me the truth of telling the truth and taking my pain to Him and bringing Him into the pain, and with Him dealing with it, letting Him take it and setting me free. Today, I'm not the woman that I once was. I have no depression. I haven't had for years. I no longer hide in my physical life or in my emotional life. I'm open and I'm vulnerable with others. I'm able to give and I'm able to receive love. I bring God into all aspects of my life, good and bad. I have ceased pretending. All of my facades, and I had many of them, are gone. Inside, in those secret places where only God and I know, I am free. can still bring me to tears to just say that out loud. I started out in life despised, rejected, disrespected, humiliated, and ultimately betrayed. And I lived that identity out for most of my life. And now, I'm living my life accepted, loved, approved of, wanted and needed, cared for, regarded, respected, and fully capable of loving deeply and loving freely. This healing prayer process of examining my past and bringing Jesus into the pain, and still bringing Jesus into my life today, into the everyday circumstances, has freed me. And it is my privilege and my joy now to be assisting other women to step into that freedom too.
I would like to just make a couple statements before we go back to talking about the testimony. Some of you may wonder, how can we get a hold of these charts? There are two manuals. This particular manual has 145 charts in it. It has a disc. You can plug this into your computer and print these charts out. There's 48 chapters here. Chapter 5, here's all the 10 charts on bitterness that we put together. And each of the 48 chapters has a different segment of charts in them. Anyone who purchases this manual purchases the right to copy any of my charts for use in counseling. You can't copy the charts or give this disc to your pastor. He has to buy his own. But I want you to use these charts, and that's what they're available for. If you don't have a computer, this particular workbook was the original one we put together. It has 45 charts. Here's the charts on bitterness in this particular chapter. This one, you just take the charts out of the 3-ring binder, you copy them and put the master back in. So if you're not computer literate, I'd encourage you to buy this one because it has an explanation of how to use the charts, and that's available as well. You listened to Alexandria talk about Marilyn leading her in a prayer. We put a 4-hour DVD together, how to actually pray with someone to lead them to freedom. And there's a section in here on how to help a person sexually abused come to freedom, how we use prayer to actually resolve people's issues inside their heart. Now, if you'll take your chart that you received this evening, we'd like to focus on that. If you listen to the testimony and you begin asking the question, what caused Alexandria to be depressed? You're going to find that Alexandria was depressed because she was not wanted. She was depressed because her mother didn't care about her. Her parents never came to any of her activities. They never valued her. And there were probably 6 things she mentioned right at the end, which were the cause of why she tripped into this depression cycle. Those are the issues that Marilyn prayed with her about. And when she came to freedom from those pain issues, her depression went away. In the same way, when you're leading a person to freedom, you have to identify what caused that person to experience depression and what caused their rejection and what was their pain. Forgive me, my voice is about ready to go out, so I'll see if I can make it through the evening. The question is, and I'd like to spend the next minutes in the conclusion of this evening to identify a person who's depressed is not really who God made them to be. A person who's depressed becomes anxious, holds anger in, pulls away socially, can't express themselves, pulls their heart away, can't make decisions, and can't focus to accomplish a task. That's who they've become because of their depression, but that's not really who they are. That's what they become because of the pain that they're experiencing in their heart. But what would happen if that person was no longer depressed? What if that person had a person like Marilyn that came beside them, listened to them, understood their pain, and cared about that pain, and prayed with them, and that pain was gone? They've become a totally different person. What if I lost all my negative thoughts that were connected to the pain that I experienced in the past and no longer experience that pain? What if I was no longer anxious? Who would I be? What if I was no longer fearful? Who would I become? You see, a depressed person becomes a different person that's connected to their pain. But that's not really who they are. That's who they've become because of pain that they have not been able to resolve. But if I resolved, or if a person that was depressed resolved their past emotional pain and its effect on them, who would they be? What if Jesus healed their past pain? Who would they become? What if one person cared about that individual? Who would they become? What would they experience in life if they no longer were depressed? In order to understand what happens inside of a depressed person, we want to ask two questions. The first question is, what didn't that person receive that they should have received that led to the depression? Now, if you listen to the testimony of Alexandria, she was not wanted. That's something she did not receive. Every child should be wanted by their mother, by their father. The father was busy and emotionally was gone. The mother didn't want that child, and that was the first reason why she felt rejected. The mother, on the other hand, despised the daughter. Second reason why she was depressed. She did not receive the emotional connection that she should have received from her parents, and that led to her clinical depression. There's a second thing you want to observe, and that is, what type of pain did a person experience that led to their depression? You'll notice in this testimony that this girl was despised, rejected, criticized, shamed, and sexually abused by her mother in her lifetime. All of these things are going to create a pain inside this girl. When you look at a depressed person, you want to ask 7 questions that may be the causes of why people are depressed. I would encourage you to write these down if you're interested in understanding a depressed person. The first is, you want to ask, has this person experienced emotional pain? Have they been neglected, rejected, sexually abused, physically abused? That can lead to depression. Secondly, you want to identify, are there spiritual issues like bitterness, moral failure in their past that has caused them to be depressed? Thirdly, is there any unconfessed sin like abortion, adultery, anger, things like that in their past that would cause them to be depressed? I've often found that people hospitalized for depression, when their mind doesn't function anymore and they begin to exaggerate things like fearing someone's going to kill them, there's almost always a secret they're hiding from something in their past they haven't told anybody. And whenever you have a secret and you hide that, that can lead to depression, which later can lead to your mind not functioning properly, with the result that you're hospitalized for depression. The fourth issue is you want to look to see if the cause of their depression is stress. Like Jesus, there was a lot of stress in his life. Every person, if you put too much stress on them, they will break down and experience depression if you put too much pressure on them. And some people are in intense pressure at work, intense pressure at their home, and that stress, that pressure can easily cause depression. The fifth cause of depression is expectations of yourself or others who have put expectations on you. And that pressure can easily cause a person to get depressed. The sixth cause is unresolved anger. And you want to check to see if the person is angry at themselves because they're not achieving enough, or if they're angry at other people for what they have done. As I said earlier, 100% of everyone hospitalized for depression, the cause is unresolved anger. Everyone that's hospitalized, Minirth Myers say in their material, that there is unresolved anger inside. The seventh cause is physical problems. People can have thyroid deficiencies causing depression. Change of life can cause depression. Chemical problems in a person's body can cause depression. But that's only 5 to 10% of depression. 90 to 95% of depression are the first 6, and that's where you want to focus on. If you'll take the chart that I shared with you, I shared the example of the Amish girl whose parents left the Amish church, and she was shunned and shamed and criticized for leaving the Amish church as a 6-year-old girl, and then she married an emotionally detached husband. That was the cause of why she experienced depression. If you were to ask me, John, why were you depressed? There were 4 reasons. First of all, my father had high expectations of me. He was critical and angry. He did not affirm me, and he lectured me. Those 4 things tripped me into depression. Now, I didn't understand that until probably 15 years ago, and I spent all my life struggling with depression, not understanding what triggered that pain. And when I found that, I began to realize it's these 4 things that I experienced when I was 13 that actually tripped me into that depression. And what I began to realize is that everyone has a reason why they're depressed. We just have to sit down and find the cause of that. And the reason I gave you this sheet is whenever you're talking with a depressed person, or if you're depressed, you want to ask, how many of these am I experiencing? What is the cause of that? And we're going to be looking at 2 things. Number 1, have I not received something emotionally I should have received as a child? Secondly, have I been damaged in any way that emotionally damaged my heart to lead to the depression? Now, how do you resolve depression? And depression is very simple if it's emotionally or spiritually to resolve. And we're going to define how we do that. A depressed person will focus on themselves and their pain and won't be able to focus to care about another person. So a husband who's depressed is focused on his pain. A wife who's depressed will focus on her pain, and they are hurting so bad they can't connect to care about each other. On occasion, you'll have a wife who's depressed, who's self-focused, married to a husband who's detached. Or you can have a husband who's angry, married to a wife who's depressed. You have all kinds of combinations. But the problem is somebody has to sit down with that depressed person and care about their hearts to understand what's happening. How does one find the source of another's depression? Well, first of all, we want to ask the question, and this is a chart, damaged relationships, that we've been talking about this week. We want to ask the question, has the person ever been damaged by emotional damage on the left hand? Were they abandoned, neglected, ignored? You'll notice that Alexandria, the girl that just gave her testimony, was rejected, disowned, humiliated, despised, disrespected, and betrayed by her mother. She had 5 of those on the left-hand column that triggered her depression. On the top, you have pressure patterns. If you had a perfectionist parent, you couldn't meet their expectations. You had a dominant parent, you had an angry parent. Those issues can damage. Spiritual issues on the right-hand column can damage. If, for example, a person was bitter and they demonstrated their anger towards you, that could damage. At the bottom, you have 4 different kinds of abuse that can damage. What I do with a person who's depressed is I ask the question, okay, how are you damaged? What didn't you receive? And what did someone do to emotionally damage your heart that created this pain within your heart? On page 116 of the blue workbook is a list of about 60 negative thoughts. And a person who's depressed, let's say at 80%, will mark 80% of these negative thoughts. Nobody loves me, nobody cares, nobody wants me, those kinds of terms. And if you are dealing with a depressed person or you're depressed, you want to take this page and check off the ones that you have had. What I do in my office is I take those words and I go back and ask, where did that negative thought come from? So if someone says, I'm all alone, no one's ever cared for me, I ask, who never focused to love you as a person? Did your dad love you? Did your mom love you? And often they'll say, my dad was too busy, he never had time for me. My mom was depressed, she emotionally drained everybody in the family. Which means neither of the parents ever connected to care. That's why that statement is there. And then I ask, did your husband care about you if you're depressed? And she says, no, my husband is just like my father, except he's totally detached. He doesn't even know or feel what's going on inside my heart. And so these negative thoughts actually lead me as a counselor to exactly what happened in that person's heart as an individual. How does love and understanding destroy depression? If one understands the cause and cares about a person's emotional pain, they will lose their depression. If one person would have stopped me in that 20 years I was depressed and said, John, what is there that triggers your depression? Can I understand what happened to you? And if they would have listened to my story, and they would have taken the time to understand, and they would have led me in a prayer, I would have lost my depression. And that is true for anyone that has emotional pain that triggers their depression. How can an understanding and a love for another person change their heart? 1 Peter 4:8 says, love covers a multitude of problems. Do you realize when you love a person that's depressed, and you seek to understand and care about their heart, they can't stay depressed? Because when I'm in my office and I sit down with a person and I start caring about their hearts and I start understanding what happened to them, they lose their depression and all of a sudden they start smiling. And I ask them a question at the end of the week, has anyone ever taken the time to understand your pain and understand what you've struggled with? And the majority of people say, no one has ever taken the time to understand me, to care. You will never solve a depression problem unless you understand and care about a person's issues in their personal life. What are the steps to resolve depression? If a person was emotionally damaged, all they need is for someone to understand and care and to lead them in a prayer once you understand their pain. If the cause is spiritual, what we need to do is lead them in a prayer to acknowledge and repent of their sin. If they had an abortion, if they damaged their children and they feel badly about that, they need someone to help them to pray to resolve that issue. If the cause is stress, we need to identify the cause and pray for Jesus to relax their heart with the pressure. If the cause is too high expectations, we need to identify the pressure and lead them in a prayer to resolve it. If the source is anger, we need to identify the source of what caused their anger and actually lead them in a prayer. If the cause is physical, obviously, they need to go to the doctor and take a blood test and find out what the issue is. How can we care for others who are depressed? The first step is to accept them where they are. Don't judge them. Don't attack them. Just care. Secondly, we need to understand the cause of their depression, and most people don't have the foggiest idea of what caused their depression. You and I have to help them. And then we need to care for what they're experiencing and lead them in a prayer to resolve that issue. In 5 simple steps, we could eradicate emotionally caused depression. If we had identified the cause of why people are depressed and understand how they were damaged, care for their pain, and lead them to Jesus in a prayer, we would eradicate 90% of depression in the church. But it takes individuals that are willing to sit down with a person and care. And I'd like to challenge you this evening, if you know someone who's depressed, I would challenge you to take the time, even if it's 2 or 3 months, just to spend a couple hours every week understanding what they're struggling with and follow this pattern that we've shared with you and assist them in actually resolving the issues that they're struggling with. I'd like to close with this statement: who would I become if I was no longer depressed? I like to challenge people that are depressed like that. A depressed person struggles with functioning, but if they lost their depression, they would become a totally different person. Who did God originally create them to be apart from their pain? And what would their life be like without depression? Every person was created by God to feel significant, valued, precious, chosen, loved, cared for, cherished, accepted, approved of, appreciated, respected, honored, and secure. The problem is a depressed person often doesn't feel any of those and is struggling inside because either someone didn't love them or someone created pain that emotionally shut them down. I just want to say this to you this evening. I care about depressed people. And my favorite thing is to see if I can take a 99% depressed person and knock off their pain. I love to do that. And hundreds of people have come to freedom from their depression, not because I know a lot, just because I took the time to understand what their pain was, cared, understood, and led them to Jesus and allowed Jesus to heal them. It's a wonderful thing to take a person who's coming into your office and their face is sad, they hadn't smiled for a long time, to see them walk out of your office smiling because Jesus healed pain in their heart. The reason I showed you Alexander's testimony, here was a lady with 99% depression, all locked up. She only had one friend that decided, I'm going to care about that girl. And she took the time to pray with her, to understand, to listen, and that lady lost her depression only because one person cared and helped her with the issue she was struggling with. I'd like to close the evening with just a short DVD of what caring for the heart is all about. It's just a summary of about 40 different testimonies, just glimpses of testimonies, and it's on a DVD. And Caring for the Heart has 20 offices in the U.S. and Canada. And we're here because we care about people. We don't charge for counseling. Each Caring for the Heart office is supported as a missionary supported. People come free. The last 17 years our office has been open. We haven't charged anyone for counseling. It's free. And God has provided our needs as we've trusted Him. And I just want you to be aware of what God is doing in multiplying Caring for the Heart, because individuals have caught the vision to say, I want to care about other people. And I'm excited for all the ones who have been committed to this ministry. So we'll close the evening with this short clip, and then they'll have a music and a prayer at the end. So let's have the video at this time.
In Psalm 147, verse 3, David tells us that God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Christ came to heal the brokenhearted. Luke 4, verse 18. Caring for the Heart Ministries seeks to care as Christ cares and is dedicated to reach out to hurting individuals and couples who have been damaged and need guidance in resolving their personal, emotional, or spiritual problems. The Caring for the Heart counseling focus is twofold. First, using biblical principles and guidelines, our counselors help individuals and couples understand their particular emotional or spiritual problems and the solution to resolving them. The counselor seeks to understand and accept the person and does not judge them for their past decisions. Second, our counselors use prayer to lead a person to Jesus, either for repentance and forgiveness for specific areas of sin, or healing and peace for emotional damage and pain. We believe that Christ is the only one who can bring freedom from spiritual issues or change one's past emotional pain.
I felt invisible. I felt unnoticed.
Being disrespected, being humiliated, being despised.
Not being needed or not being wanted, depressed to the point of wanted to end my life.
I just knew there was a problem. I knew I was it, but I didn't know how to fix it.
All those years, I was very self-focused.
I was unwanted from the very beginning.
I think I had disassociated so much that I didn't have much memory. My mind would fog up when that pressure would come.
All I wanted was for him to love me and be proud of me.
16 years into marriage, and I've never told my wife I'm sorry for anything.
And I never could perform spiritually to please my father and mother, and then I got rejected, and I closed up my heart.
I didn't think I was worthy of love. I had hidden my heart from the very beginning.
The moment I would feel a little bit of pressure, I would cut my heart off.
I would close off my heart, and those feelings of rejection and having to perform and stuff that came with my spiritual abuse, and the terror, the literal terror that would bring into my heart just was devastating to me, and just confirmed over and over and over that I could never measure up to what God wanted from me.
There was never any heart-to-heart conversations. There wasn't an emotional connection between us where we felt really close emotionally.
My father, though, was very abusive, and so I grew up in fear.
I can't remember a single time where my mother said that she loved me or that she cared about me.
I had enough life experience to know that you don't just fall in love and live happily ever after. My perception of marriage was that people get married and they spend the next 30 years pushing each other's buttons. I knew we were going to have to get counseling in order to have a shot at escaping this destructive cycle.
As he led me to Jesus, I understood that Jesus loved me so much, and I couldn't believe that he had always been there for me and completely freed me. And it was such a joy, and it's completely changed our lives, our children's lives.
I am excited for what the Lord has done in my life. I never thought it would be possible. After waiting 35 years for my husband to talk to my heart, to care about my heart, to be able to come close, to have an intimate relationship with him. It truly is a miracle of God, and I'm thankful.
We learned through Caring for the Heart ministries and the time that we spent there how to care for each other and not to feel alone and isolated in our pain.
I told her that I'm free. I no longer have that pain.
He took me into prayer. For the next 2 days, for 8 hours, I cried out all the pain that I had pushed down for years and years. And Jesus did an open heart surgery on me. And only Jesus could heal and restore to my heart that memory.
And teach me how to do that. And so we would pray together, and I would pray daily and often on my own in that Caring for the Heart way.
And then Jesus gave me this picture, this image of a report card that said A+++.
Jesus is the wonderful counselor.
We went to resolution, to healing, to prayer, and to solving it. The idea that you could just solve the problem, I mean, that was revolutionary. I was surprised by how practical.
We have some great tools. We have healed hearts that are only a result of what God has done in our lives.
And I found that list of pain words. As I read it, I was surprised that was me. I felt like it belonged to someone else. I couldn't even identify with that level of pain anymore. I am truly free from the power of a painful past. I don't live there anymore.
The thing that stands out to me probably in our counseling the most is the word pictures that Jesus gave me. I just saw this picture of Jesus standing tall and strong, and there was a little girl with her arms and her feet wrapped around him.
We went to Caring for the Heart Ministries, and his heart was set free, and my heart was turned toward him. And our marriage hasn't been the same since, and we continue to grow closer every day. And I'm thankful for the healing that we found at Caring for the Heart Ministries and the marriage we have now.
Really enjoy a relationship heart to heart that I didn't think was possible. I would never have thought it was possible. It was incredible.
That freedom that everyone has talked about is something that is real. When Jesus heals, it's perfect. And it's complete. It changed all our lives, just totally.
It was just so wonderful to be able to connect with her heart on an emotional level, and he just led us in a prayer that was just incredible, that we connected with Jesus in a way that we couldn't comprehend. It just blew us away. And how that 1 hour changed our married life.
These guys deal with the heart. And once that heartstring is broken and you've released all that pain and hurt, the relationship you'll have with your spouse is unbelievable.
And the last 2 years have been amazing. We thought we had a good marriage before. Now we have an amazing marriage. And our kids, we regret the things that we've passed on to our kids, but they like the change. And they said, don't change back, Mom and Dad.
She actually understood me, and that was so powerful for me. It was life-changing, really, in our relationship.
In many ways, it feels like being on a second honeymoon, only this time around it's more open and free. We feel whole.
You're on cloud nine.
We're on a honeymoon.
I still feel the love butterflies.
And I never wanted it to go away.
And we've seen couples come together this past summer, been apart 12, going on 13 years, had victory, all coming through to victory, going through the Caring for the Heart Ministries. And you talk about joy. You never see more joy than you do seeing people coming to the Lord.
And as we went through the counseling, we just realized how much we needed it. We needed it so desperately, and we had no idea. We were so locked up, and we had so much pain, and it was just life transforming for us.
I don't believe there's any greater joy than being able to see other people come to freedom and to be a tool in God's hand.
He just said, somebody damaged your heart. But the way he asked that question was the first time in my life that I could remember somebody caring for what was on the inside.
As I just began to talk to her little bit by little bit, she opened up, or I opened up more as she made me feel like she really cared. She listened, she accepted me just the way I was, and she believed me, and that meant a lot.
Caring for the Heart Ministries has a network of offices located throughout the United States and Canada. Each office director and counselor has been trained to identify and understand the issues an individual is struggling with and lead them to resolve their issues. Caring for the Heart has 5 goals. First, Caring for the Heart is involved in counseling those who desire help. This may involve individuals, couples anticipating marriage, or those who are already married. Second, Caring for the Heart produces resources designed to provide tools for pastors and lay counselors to identify and resolve issues in believers' lives. Third, Caring for the Heart provides seminars in churches to share how couples can experience freedom from different types of problems they struggle with. Fourth, Caring for the Heart provides training through seminars in churches and in their home office. This is designed to train believers in this counseling model. An additional training opportunity is the Caring for the Heart internship program provided at the home office, where interns come and observe week-long counseling cases. This practical program helps them understand the counseling process. Fifth, to replicate the Caring for the Heart counseling model by establishing encouragement teams in local churches and establishing counseling offices. John Regier is the founder and director of Caring for the Heart Ministries. He and his wife Barb have 4 grown children and, at the present time, 17 grandchildren. After pastoring for 24 years and counseling couples in the churches where he pastored, John and Barb were led to open a counseling office where they could devote their entire time to this counseling ministry. Caring for the Heart is a faith-based ministry that provides counseling free of charge. The director or counselor at each Caring for the Heart office is funded through donations and contributions of believers who desire and are committed to share in the continuance of the ministry. A group of dedicated Caring for the Heart directors who share the same values and goals lead this ministry. For more information, feel free to contact Caring for the Heart Ministries, 3545 American Drive, Colorado Springs, Colorado 80917. Please visit our website at www.caringfortheheart.com or contact us at our office via email caringfortheheart@msn.com or phone 719-572-5550.